unite yourself and have a greater focus. But then there are people that do this in different ways.
Yes.
And some people, let me start. What is your thinking about Deepak Chopra?
I think he's a great leader, spiritual leader, and I've read about it a bit, but not very much. I started reading about him I think 10 years ago. He spoke about the shadow and the warriors of light. And I am into meditation. My introduction to meditation happened through my school. So one day, all of us, we were kind of called. And there was
you've been meditating for a long time, right?
Since I was 10 or 12 years old, something like that.
That's a long time.
So
not saying you're old, but I mean, it's from 10 years old is a long time.
Yeah, a long time ago. So we didn't know what it was. So we were called one by one into a room, and then there was a master who kind of asked a few questions, and then he gave us like a small mantra, and he said, just chant it. And every day after the class, at the end of the school hours, we were like spend like 30 minutes just chanting. That time it was mostly like sleeping or...
And when you say chanting, just so people understand, what do you mean with chanting?
Chanting is that repeating that sound or a word or a thought or an affirmation over and over and over again.
Do you have a favorite word or sound that you use?
I can disclose it actually.
Okay, that's so good. You shouldn't do that, right?
Yes, you're not supposed to. If you've got it from some spiritual guru, then you're not supposed to disclose it, because then the power of that mantra kind of dissipates. Yes. But people do it. Like for example, Om is a very kind of a common sound that you can. But you have different. What you can do is like look at the word and look at what the vibration means. So there are different words which have different vibrations, and then ultimately it's a personal choice, I believe, whatever works for you. Nowadays I prefer to kind of focus on my breathing and then get a deep relaxation like this, and then stay. Do you
have some special breathing technique that you make use of?
Box breathing. So you start with the box breathing. It's so you kind of breathe 6 in, and then you hold 6, and then you exhale like 8, and then you kind of keep like that for
6 seconds and 8 seconds.
It could be 6 seconds, or it could be like 6 breaths if you take constantly. So you have that, but you have to exhale longer than you inhale, and then you have to stay without air for something like 3 or 4 seconds. So you have 6, 6, and then 8 and 4, and then you repeat it like 3 times, 4 times, as much as it suits. And then when you let go, then the natural flow of your breath starts, and that's when you observe. You don't need to put effort in breathing. The breath just comes in and goes.
Do you breathe in or out through the nose or the mouth, or do you have a special way to do that?
Once you let go, it just let the body decide. Sometimes if you're too overworked and your blood oxygen level in your blood is low, then you probably breathe through nose and mouth. But eventually, after some time, you will feel that the breath has become very still, and you can't actually hear your breath. You cannot feel your breath. It becomes very subtle. You don't kind of feel it anywhere, but you can feel it kind of. You feel that, but you start feeling the energy. You start feeling that sensation going in and out. And once you start focusing on that, and then you just zone everything out, then you feel relaxation, and then you feel more connection. And
that's cool. I haven't done meditation for as long as you have, just a few years, but I try to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth, and I think that works rather well for me. But I still have to focus a lot on the breathing, and the way I think the state that you come into, where you don't even think about that, is something I haven't been able to reach yet, at least. So it sounds interesting. But just speaking about Deepak Chopra a bit, I probably have a bit of a subjective understanding of him, because I think I only heard the bad part of it. So I've heard something. What was he saying? I think he said, he can do quantum healing. So he tries to connect quantum mechanics with healing, even like, and I'm probably wrong when saying it, but at least that's the hearsay I've been hearing. That he says that the quantum healing that he proposed can heal even cancer, and to me that's a very dangerous thing to say, and even illegal in some way. Have you heard about this?
I have heard about quantum healing. I mean, there are many different such modalities. Good, bad, and I try not to get into that. But Greg Braden, I'm not sure if you heard about him. He's a physicist.
What?
Greg Braden.
No,
he had a presentation where he actually showed live one of the cancer getting dissolved. He actually pictured it
by meditation or what?
No. So the story is like they went to a Himalayan cave where a lady had a cancer,
Yeah.
It was last stage, and she goes to and they were kind of recording not the process, but they were kind of recording the sound and also the ultrasound of the tumor, and they started gather around and they started chanting, and real time in that you can see that tumor kind of dissolving and then disappearing completely.
You know, this is almost making me a bit angry actually, because if that was true, you know, and there were scientific evidence of this, you know, I'm a scientist, so I really do require, you know, proper evidence for anything to be true. And if something like that was possible, you know, why wouldn't more people do it? Why wouldn't that be the standard when you go to hospital, for example?
Yeah, that's the reason why I try to stay away from these things and focus. I mean, if this is enough, I believe everybody is trying their best to do what they're doing. And if everybody just focuses on what they are doing best, I think that's good enough. Don't need to go into all those things, because once it's like a slippery slope. Once you get into this, there is no stopping. So I try to go. I try not to go, and I try to stay on what works for me.
Yeah. That's a good thing. Cool. I think we can speak for a long time about meditation, and perhaps we get back to that in the end. You know, we're going a bit more philosophical in our discussions. But let me first say, you know, welcome here. It's a pleasure to have you here, Somil Gupta.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
We met a bit before, and this is, of course, great to have you here and discuss you. But for people that don't know you, how would you describe yourself?
Okay, so my name is Somil Gupta. I'm originally from India. And my background is I was trained as an electronics and instrumentation engineer, so working with the sensors and actuators and control systems, process control. That's my background. And in the college, I got interested in robotics, and then one thing led to another, and I ended up taking up a course in image processing, and then ended up majoring in computer vision and artificial neural networks at the time. Yeah.
And what year was this?
This was around 2008. So, but that time there was not much happening, not that I was aware of. And I remember because I used to do my code in MATLAB, and then actually had to manually run the iterations and do the backpropagation and calculation and everything, and then code that into C and then flash this into robot. It was not a very joyous process. But we did.
It still isn't today, I would say.
Yes.
But it's a bit better than that, but not much.
What we could achieve in 1 year was, so basically I asked all my classmates to come and kind of give samples. What we could achieve was that we could, if you make a gesture in front of camera, the robot would do something. It would go forward or go back. But that's about it. It was very difficult to get data at that time.
So it's some kind of image classification?
Image classification, image detection. So we were kind of sampling the image, kind of transforming it, and then trying to recognize what a gesture is, using moments, different types of moments, and then making a decision what gesture it could be, and then what the robot should do.
And 2008, I mean, that's way before even AlexNet and these kind of normal convolutional neural networks and whatnot. So what kind of neural networks did you use?
We use simple perceptron networks, I think 4 or 5, 3 or 4 hidden layers, because beyond that, the computer would crash. But very simple kind of neural networks. And focus was more on the feature engineering. At that time, we didn't have so much tools. So just taking the moments, just taking simple features, because the color tones and everything has to be adjusted. It was a very simple model. But it did something. And we were very happy. Okay, it does something.
Yeah, I'm super cool.
But then that kind of stopped there, and I actually joined Bosch as an automotive engineer. I was working with the cruise control team. So building the control systems.
Please, for people who don't know Bosch, how would you describe the company? What do they do?
It's an automotive engineering company. They make, most of the components that you have in a car. For example, you have engine control systems, you have battery management systems. Most of those control systems that you have in your cars, the ECUs that you have in your cars, are built by Bosch, along with different components. So you have wiper blades.
It's a big company as well.
It's a big company. It's around 85 billion euro company.
Yeah.
And so my role was quite simple. So you have cruise control in your vehicle, and I used to kind of program that for different customers. 3 years on, I realized that I'm not as much interested in technical as I am in talking to people or into the business part. So I decided to get a master's in industrial management. But then I focused more on the product management and the sales and marketing aspects. And I joined Bosch again as a business development manager. But this time I also joined part of their leadership development program. And so I kind of joined, I was supporting sales from a strategy point of view, and that was kind of good because it got me the first few assignments I think the second assignment was about taking analytics to market. Data analytics, big data analytics to market. And the third, 2014.
Can you just unpack that a bit more?
Yeah.
Analytics to market, what do you really mean with that?
So basically, Bosch had built a team of data scientists and statisticians.
Yep.
And we had a few PhDs, and they were very good at taking the manufacturing data, or for example, any kind of domain data, and then build analytical insights from that. So we had, for example, use cases that go into, for example, warranty management systems. So how can you predict warranty costs? How could you predict quality issues in your plant by looking at different? How could you reduce test times when you're doing testing of your components?
So analytics in that case was more on the process of the manufacturing?
Process of the manufacturing, yeah. So basically on the engineering data, or on the service data, on the test data, quality data. And then we try to run and find insights, more descriptive analytics. Yeah. So this was part of the gold rush, where you wanted to find those golden nuggets somewhere hidden, and try to see if you can do something with that. Yeah. So that went on for some time, and then I got into IoT, because IoT kind of came naturally to me because of sensors, and I had that background. So I thought, well, internet, sensors, what could go wrong?
Exactly.
And the next 3 years, I actually spent working with customers, building solutions. I spent a lot of time in plants, in warehouses, in retail stores, trying to understand the process, trying to understand the problems, and then trying to build the solutions.
And can you just give some example perhaps of an IoT device that you have worked a lot with?
Yeah. For example, you can take the tracking and traceability is one option. So you have those big pallets that need to be, that get shipped from one place to another. And you need to identify, give me an example. Let's say if we have Arla here, and they produce milk, and the milk has to be stored in a certain temperature. If it's not stored at a certain temperature, then the grading of the milk, or the quality of the milk, goes down. And you need a way to ensure that they are stored at a certain temperature. And if they are not stored at a certain temperature, then the grading has to go down. So Bosch had a sensor which was called transport data logger, I guess. So
once again,
transport data logger.
Okay.
It was a small Bluetooth-based sensor. You kind of put it into the pallet, and it would measure the vibration. It would measure temperature, humidity. And
was it like a passive device, or was it like RFID kind of thing?
It was a Bluetooth enabled, and so the data communication was Bluetooth enabled. But it's like you switch it on, put it. At the end of the journey, you connect with it and then get all the data. Okay. So it will tell you how many hours. Because what we realized was a lot of times in India, these reefer companies, they switch off the AC or the cooling to save cost. Yeah. And nobody knows. So this could be one example. Yeah. So there were multiple examples where you wanted to put sensors and wanted to get data and then do something about that, or monitor that, or validate something. So that's something.
No, that's really good. Cool. So I think IoT is of course very interesting, and you can do it in so many different ways. For one, to collect data, as you say, but also moving computation to the edge in some ways, which we perhaps can move or talk more about later.
Yep.
But cool. So you work with IoT at Bosch in different ways, right?
And some part towards 2016, 17, I realized that when you look at the scale of IoT, when you have like 10,000 devices selling you data, we incidentally did a concept for SmartPort with one of our partners, and we realized that if you actually put sensors in all the systems, and we build a command and control center, we need around 500 people just to monitor all the systems. And then it felt like, okay, this doesn't make sense. Yeah. So there has to be something. And that time, I was not aware of what we know as today as stream analytics. So that didn't make sense with having dashboards and stuff like that. So I kind of got a feeling that we're missing something here. And then the analytics is then more important. The intelligence is more important than IoT. And the IoT, my hypothesis at the time was that IoT will eventually become infrastructure topic or an R&D topic where you embed sensors, but the more and more value creation will happen at the intelligent level or at the analytics level. And that's something that we're seeing now.
So you need more than data. You need the algorithms.
You need the algorithms. You need the algorithms, because otherwise you cannot manage so many devices. You can't make sense out of it. So situational awareness, where we were talking about situational awareness, we had some systems which could detect fire. But just detecting fire with a camera was not enough. You also need to fuse that data with, let's say, a smoke detector. You also need to fuse that data with, let's say, a temperature sensor from a building. So you need more than data to make sense of what's happening, and then to react to what's happening.
I'm true. We've been saying so many times in this podcast, we want to use data and AI, and one of the things that AI is really good at is trying to work with a large amount of data.
Yeah.
And that's something that humans are really bad at.
Yes.
And I think you phrase it so eloquently there, saying, you have 10K devices, but you need 500 people to monitor them, which obviously is not very efficient.
It's not very efficient. It kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
Because then you have 500 people, then you need 50 people to monitor those 500 people. And then it never stops.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so and then you continued for quite some time at Bosch as well.
At Bosch, yes, I was I was partner manager. So in between, I also went from business development to alliance management, and I was with Bosch Software Innovations. So that time, Bosch was releasing their Bosch IoT suite 2.0. The 1.0 was still kind of more on-prem. And we still had like M2M module. I'm not sure if you know M2M. It's like, it's the ancestor of IoT. So machine-to-machine communication. Proprietary messages. It was very rarely, it was IP-based. It was most of the time proprietary messaging communication. OSGI was the framework, and there were a couple of things happening. But that was time when all these companies had grouped together into different M2M platforms. So Samsung had one, and Intel had one, and everybody was trying to join up. And then you had a platform. Then you had interoperability platform, and it was a mess. So
sounds
that
like
time.
a bit like semantic web, if you remember that from the beginning of 2000, but machine readable, but in reality it didn't work.
Yeah. So that happened, and then kind of I was there in Germany for some time. Then I got an opportunity to come to Sweden and lead the.
This was in what year?
This was in 17. To lead the business development and sales for the digital solutions, so data, AI, blockchain, IoT in the Nordic region. And I worked with
still
Bosch.
For Bosch then, yeah.
Yeah, still for Bosch. And then I did that for like around till 2019, and since then. So interestingly, what I was doing as a part of because IoT was an unproven technology, I was building business cases for my clients so that they could get budget and they could prove value to their management. And I also needed it to do my own pricing because it was a new technology and we didn't know exactly how much it's going to cost. So that business case development, that value definition, and I was kind of quantifying the value because unlike data and AI, in IoT, you cannot go off more than like 5-10%. It will kill your business case because you're talking about physical devices here. And they are very expensive and the margin is like 7-8%, 10% max. One time we had a business model where we forgot to take into account the shrinkage. So assets were getting stolen. And we didn't do that, and we did not put that clause into the service contract that the assets in your premise is like your responsibility. Customer said, I'm not going to pay for it. That kind of the whole business model collapsed because of that, because we could not prevent the shrinkage. So that I think that formed the basis of monetization. I thought, and one of the clients said, why don't you just do this for us? Because right now we don't have anyone who's doing this, and this is quite good because the value hypothesis that I created, it was making sense for them. Because I would not say, hey, take the solution, it will do this. I'll say, hey, listen, right now your process or your cost is like this. If you implement this solution, then it's going to become like this. So this is your net benefit. And if you accrue this over so many years, and this is the investment, you're going to get your ROI in like 3 years, 4 years, or 1.5 years, 2 years.
So monetization is actually one of your expertise areas. So I
yes.
think we will talk a lot more about that. But before we move into that, you started speaking about blockchain as well. And
yes.
It's a love and hate kind of children of mine, speaking about blockchain.
Yeah.
And as so many other topics. But still, okay, can you just elaborate a bit more? What did Bosch use blockchains for at that time?
Different applications. For example, you could use it to register some things. Let's say you want to do, you want to monitor the ownership of a vehicle or a change in ownership of the vehicle. One good, for example, use case could be the taxation, because different countries have different tax laws when it comes to based on the origin of the vehicle and based on where the origin of the part and where the vehicle was when it broke down. So even within EU, you have like different rules and regulations enforcing that. Simple use case, if you go back to the previous example of IoT of the milk, so we could put that data on the blockchain and have a smart contract. So if the quality is as per grade A, then you get paid so much. If it goes to B, then you get paid so much.
And just to clarify, what is the added value of having a blockchain compared to simply storing it in a database?
That's a good question. It's usually we need blockchain when the parties don't trust each other. For example, if you have a mining environment, or if you're on an oil rig. In an oil rig, you have thousands of vendors who are working together, and the output of one is consumed is input for other. And you have situations where they don't really have a consensus. So that's where you cannot have, I can give one example. For example, a mining customer. So their problem is that they want their performance contract, with each of their vendors is to have at 95%. But the efficiency that the mine gets is somewhere around 70%. Now, they don't know why it is happening. Who is actually causing these problems? The problem is they cannot share one person's data with the other person. So you cannot give access to, share. You could, but then the trust becomes an issue. So those kind of trustless situations is what I see. But it's kind of paradoxical, I believe, because if the only way you want to use blockchain is to remove a central party, but then you still need a central party to invest in the blockchain infrastructure, and then that becomes paradoxical.
Yeah, that's a classical argument. You want to use blockchains to remove the middleman, so to speak, the banks or whatnot, and that's a really good argument, I think, of course. Yeah. But then, in your case, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like you have your own blockchain network that you have between a few set of parties.
Bosch, that was we are building solutions on technology. I think Hyperledger or those kind of open source technology or some technology.
Mm-hmm. But who was participating in that blockchain network that you were using at that time? Was it just Bosch itself, or was it actually also the customers?
We are building solutions for the customers, and usually it was the customers and their partners who are using the blockchain solution. So we are building the solution, for example, if you build it for a dairy company, then all the farmers who have cattle can then register to it. Mm-hmm. And then you can have the proof of ownership or change in ownership can be detected in the blockchain as a ledger. Otherwise, sometimes it becomes difficult to identify the actual, if you actually want to trace it back into what really happened. So yes, you can have an argument that you can go do that maybe today very efficiently with maybe
the database is owned by
Kafka log or something like that, right? But I think that time those concepts were not there. So today I'll say probably maybe having a log would make more immutable log makes more sense than doing all that work. But then
blockchain is such an interesting topic, I think. So I think I'll add that to the list and let's dig a bit deeper into that and Facebook Libra and whatnot and so many things and NFTs and all these kind of things.
I am no longer into blockchain right now, so I just kind of stopped.
Perhaps we shouldn't focus on that, but it's still a very popular, interesting topic. Even though I personally have a love and hate relationship to it. Cool. But then you moved more into monetization and business development, right?
Yeah.
And how would you describe the rest of your journey, so to speak?
So rest of the journey has been good. Initially, when I was talking about monetization, there was people were confused and not very sure what I was talking about. Incidentally, the monetization, I'm not sure if you have heard the term infonomics.
No.
So 10 years ago, a gentleman called Doug Laney, that time he was with Gartner, coined this term infonomics, which was the economic value of information. And then his argument is that why is information not classified as an asset by an organization if if it derives so much value from it? And he says, the information has all the attributes of an asset. It has you can create an income out of it. You can store it. You can change ownership. So it has all. But why is it not done? So the idea kind of has stayed for a long time, but somehow I don't know why it has not. I did not pick up for some reason. Gartner published a few papers but it kind of never. I think the reason for this is monetization is very much linked to the ownership and accountability at the business. And I feel that business leaders have so far trying to kind of delegate this responsibility to the data teams. And so you here's the data and you do something with it. And I know that because I've experienced that. When I used to go and say, okay, the question was like, okay, what can you do for us? The question that didn't make sense, because if you are supposed to give me requirements, you should know what you want. But that was not the case. Very few companies were able to kind of articulate in a very simple way what is it that they're trying to do. And that doesn't happen. So monetization, because what happens is if you're a business leader, and if I ask you to own something, that's an initiative, the first thing you're going to ask, any business leader worth his or her salt will say, what's in it for me? What does it cost? What I'm going to get end of it? What's the ROI? That's the first and fundamental question that you ask if you want to own something, right? And if you're not asking that question, then the only kind of thing that I derive from it is that you do not want to own it. So I think monetization, in my opinion, is very much linked to that, how much engaged you are with data and AI. Do you really see that as value creating for yourself? Or do you really see that as something that you feel you have an option or a choice to use or not?
Yeah, and this is, as I said, a topic in itself, and let's move there very shortly. But today you're working with a number of interesting things, right? So what do you do now after Bosch as well?
After Bosch, I work with different companies, help them monetize their data and AI investment. A lot of times companies have been investing in an initiative for a very long time, but they still don't have not everybody in the organization has a clear understanding of what they are building or why they are doing it. So you need a framework to where everybody could agree to. And my firm belief is that, data and AI is like any other product development. You need the entire organization together if you want to really do something with it, right? But if your sales and marketing is disengaged, if your legal, commercial is disengaged, if your finance is disengaged, you can't do that. So large part of the work that we do, that I do right now, is trying to define that concept, try to define that the whole business model, and then get everybody to agree to it. And when everybody agrees to it, when everybody knows that we're talking about the same thing, that's when people start seeing value of working together. And I think one of the good thing happened was that very early in the definition of the product, we were able to secure sales ownership. So sales guy said, okay, this makes sense. We said, okay, this is what we are going to build. Are you willing to sell this thing? And sales guy said, yes, this is very exciting. I'm very interested. And immediately they got 3 customers and they say, hey, why don't you present this to them? And then, okay, why don't you validate this with them? So that was something is very interesting, because you get people engaged, you get people excited. You're no longer trying to push your own product or your own initiative. It becomes their initiative. Right. Marketing is more interested. This purchase is interested. That is, I think, bringing people together.
Yeah, the ownership question is certainly very important, as you say. Cool. And I know you have, if we move over a bit to monetization, and you are an expert in that, of course, and advise other companies and do so many things and speak about that, and public speaker about these things. And for people still, you have spoken a bit about it already, but if you just try to describe, what is really monetizations to you?
Okay.
How would you describe it?
I define it as so monetization enables realization of economic value of data and AI assets by unlocking their embedded knowledge and insight and utilizing it for better decisions, better strategies that leads to better financial performance. That's how I define it.
Yep.
And there are like 4 keywords. There's basically a reason for defining it like this way, because there are 4 keywords that are important. The first part is financial performance. Right. We want to bring this down to financial performance, because if you look at the theory of firms, based on the finance definition of value, the role of a business is to maximize the shareholder value. Right? To maximize the return on equity, return on investment. Yeah. So whether you like it or not, every business leader in the organization is responsible for that at the end of the day. Yes. So it's very important to define that monetization or define any initiative from that point of view. The second is the realized value. Because if you look at the value cycle, we have value discovery, value creation, delivery, and realization. Yeah.
Take that again, because that's a number of cycles that you mentioned that I think is interesting to talk about. So you had discovery.
Value discovery. So you understand what value is. You talk to your customers, you understand, you look at the market, you do your surveys, and you understand what value is for the customer. That's the discovery.
So it's a discovery process that you do first.
The creation is then you build something. You build a product.
Yeah.
You build a solution, right? You build something that will fulfill that need in the market. Yeah. Then you have the value delivery, in which you ship that product and take it to where your customers can consume it. And then you have a realization, which is finally converting that back into cash, because you started with cash.
It actually matches my T-shirt today. It says commit, deploy,
scale and repeat.
I think it's not exact same 4 cycles, but
it's similar.
It's a bit about
it's similar.
You should build something, commit it. You should deploy it. You should find the value and then cycle it.
And most of the development that at least I see is focused on the discovery and creation part. And very little on the realization and delivery part. So basically, let's say if you have R&D and manufacturing, they're creating value, converting cash to inventory. And then you have sales and distribution, we're converting inventory back to cash at a higher rate, hopefully. And then you can have better financial performance. You need to have a similar equation for the NDI products. So if you do not have realized value, if you're not talking about realized value, and another thing is that my hypothesis is if realized value is less than created value, then it results into underutilization of a product or a service. Right. And what happens when you have underutilization is that you have low return on effort. That means your team will most likely be demotivated because they cannot see all that they have built into action. You have a lower ROI. So that means you're not getting enough returns. You are maintaining and operating much more than what the customer is willing to pay for. And what happens this third is that it also subsequents your other investment, because most of your funds or your cash is now stuck in this technological inventory and it's not available for other high value initiatives.
Do you have a potential example that we could just try to go through these 4 cycles with, discovery phase or creation phase and so forth?
We can take any product, for example. Let's say we want to have, I was talking about this equipment as a service.
Which one?
The equipment, something as a service. Yeah. The discovery would be to understand why would your customer would like to rent this from you rather than buy this from you.
Let me help you with that. Let's take something a friend of mine is doing, which is working with Volvo, and they're building cars that is not supposed to be sold as products, but rather as a service. Yep. So it's I think similar to what it says. It's equipment, in this case a car. You want to use it for something, a service, which is transportation, moving from point A to B. And then it should have some kind of value, and it should be some kind of realized value, hopefully in the end. And I don't think it's proven there yet. But if we take that specific example, they're trying to they had some kind of discovery, and they realized the whole idea of owning cars is perhaps not really very sustainable. And they thought, we can change the business model completely. And say, just as you don't own music anymore, just as you don't own movies anymore, just as you don't, you rent Uber these days, perhaps you can do the same with cars. And then they try to have a service, transportation service, instead of, building products as cars as you own. So, okay, given that could potentially be a discovery process,
that
right?
Could be a discovery. So why do you think basically who you think in the entire population of Sweden, who would like to go for such service? You could have people who are kind of here for a short time. You might have people who are, for example, companies who want to offer this as a service to their employees. You could have maybe hotels or other installations. So basically, who would be interested in this kind of a service, and why? Why renting will make more sense to them compared to owning? Right. So that's kind of the discovery process, and you understand why exactly, how much are they going to gain if they are able to, if they rent instead of owning. So you have some common kind of argument saying, okay, well, you don't have to service anymore, we will take care of your service. For me, the biggest use case would be that I don't know a lot about how things are done here in Sweden, so I would really love to kind of have someone maintain the car for me, changing the winter tires, summer tires, doing all that stuff, because I don't want to do it. Or someone who says, okay, I don't drive all the time, but I just drive it in summer, and it would be good if I could just have it rented for like 3-4 months max, because I don't drive any. So that is the discovery part, and you need to have a very specific, very strong reason why your customer would like to have that. And why would they prefer this compared to buying the car, buying your car, buying some other car, taking Uber. So what are the alternatives for them? What's the next best alternative for your customer if they don't want to rent and if they don't want to buy? So that's kind of a discovery service.
So you identify some kind of problem that exists today?
Problem and then quantify its impact. Why are we doing this? What is my customer going to get out of it? If it's is it financial savings? Is it peace of mind? Is it more time? I don't know. But that's something that's part of the discovery. And then you build
the service.
Build the service. And you change the car. For example, you would like to have, this is like something that we worked on. We said, okay, how can we make the car experience customizable? How can we kind of automatically detect it's you, Anders, based on, let's say, your phone or something, and then we say, okay, you like this kind of music, so I kind of preload those music. I could
play dansband then in the car.
Yeah,
in this case.
Yeah.
That's
so
very.
I
Lasse
could
Stefans, perhaps, yes.
I could maybe adjust the steering width or kind of recommend you so that we have the right steering width, we have the right seat length, we have the right height, right back support, etc. The more ergonomically, for you. So that's how you kind of create value for your customer, because then they need to get something out of it, something more than what they will get from buying a car. Right. The experience has to be much better. Yeah. Then the question is, how are you going to deliver this? So are you going to sell this through your normal dealerships? Because they might not be very willing, because it's kind of hurt their business.
Yeah, exactly. Destroys their business model as well.
Yeah. Or do you want to do it direct? But then again, you kind of risk alienating your channel partners. Or you want to kind of have this as a separate startup as a service, or you want to partner with someone. You have different options. How exactly are you going to take this to market? How do you take it from your factory to your customer, where they can drive it and use it? But then at the same time, what are the other touch points? So what happens if a customer needs to service it? What happens if a car breaks down? Are you going to cover roadside assistance? Is it part of the package or not? What happens in changing tires? What happens in so you have to do the mandatory inspection every 14 months. Do you take care of that? So what exactly is a give and get? What is your customer supposed to do? Because if you're buying a car, you have to do all this on your own. Right. But if I'm renting the car, I don't want to do all this. Yeah. But do you build that into the cost? Do you build that into the subscription?
In some way it has to be included, but perhaps not.
But what you give free as value, what you charge for.
Cool.
And then the realization part is then finally when it comes down to the price, when it comes down to the actual subscription, when it comes down to the actual service contract that the customer is going to sign, and how are you going to uphold that? Signing a contract is easy, but how do you really implement this? How do you implement a service? How do you implement insurance? How do you implement different things? And then from there, when you operate this for some time, then you have new insights, and then you're back into discovery.
And when you say realization value, do you mean more like the amount of sales, or do you mean more of like user experience? What the user really.
Eventually, it has to generate cash because you've done all that. You have created, you have discovered value, you have created value, you have delivered value to the customer. Now, what do you expect? I expect to be paid. So the UX or service gen ultimately has to lead to customer paying me for the value that I've created. So in the realization, it's about how do I get paid? What are the touch points? What is the customer pays me for? How often does he pay me for? Okay,
so let me give a counter example. And I'm trying to find a bad example here and just to hear what your thinking is. So let's say that we want to maximize the sales for coming quarter. And we can do that in different ways. And then we have, let's say we have two KPIs. One is the amount of, the turnover that we have that quarter. And secondly, it's some kind of value of the user experience, which could be, I don't know, the length of the ride, or if we have some kind of survey that, they give some NPS score or something for, how well they actually like the service. And then we have to make a choice after the quarter saying, okay, we want to maximize the sales. And when we did it this way, we actually get a higher number of sales, but lower, NPS score. And then we have to make a choice. And what would you guide companies to do then? Should they focus on sales also for the next quarter? Or are there examples where the sales could perhaps not be the best KPI?
Depends where you are in the maturity. I mean, if you see the BCG, you have the dogs, you have the cash cow, you have the star, and you have the question mark, right? If it's a star, what's your priority? If my priority is growth and penetration, I would like to keep sales enough to cover my costs. But I'm not looking at really monetizing it, or I'm not really looking at cashing it out, right? Because I want to reinvest that money into more. Sure. So, but if let's say I've been running it for like 5 years, I have a significant or a comfortable market position and I don't want to grow this anymore and I want to now cash it out. So that's when I start kind of reducing. You see that a lot of companies, they kind of start taking away some of the fringe benefits, and then they start kind of increasing the price. And then you start putting some, for example,
Okay, so let me then be a devil's advocate.
Yes.
And this is a very interesting topic, I think, by the way. So if you want to, what I'm really trying to get is about, how we should optimize for short term versus long term in some way. And just to give a more concrete example, then let's say that we want to maximize sales for coming quarter. And you can do a number of things to do that. One is to invest in more marketing. That probably will generate more sales. So that's going to be rather good. The other alternative is to invest more perhaps in innovation and R&D work. And that's probably going to reduce sales because you don't spend as much on that. But potentially long term, you're going to gain more.
Yep.
So what's your thinking there? How should we balance, the more long-term potential financial gains versus the short-term potential gains?
So, okay. Again, I'm going to say as a consultant, it depends.
Good. We scientists say that as well.
Yes. But usually what company wants to do is that you need to cover let's take this Volvo example as a service. What happens is when you're offering something as a service, you're still funding for its cost. So it is still on your inventory. It is still a capital cost that you're incurring. So you need a way to finance that, right? So you still need to cover your operational cost, because operational cost, it's very difficult to cover later. Because over a period of time, the customers expect you have competitive pressures, you have more players coming in, customers get more familiar with the product. Usually the price kind of comes down, right? So if you're not covering your costs in the beginning, right?
But what do you mean you should cover the costs already from the beginning? I mean, what
basic operational costs. So let's say if I have deployed, let's say 5 people into a call center to take calls and support my customers, that's a variable cost for me. That needs to be covered. I am paying an interest on the fund. It could be even an internal, interest. But I'm paying an interest on the money that I have taken as a loan from the company to finance this car for this customer. That interest at least needs to be paid. So there are some parts of the cost that needs to be covered. The operational part, the variable cost should ideally be covered, because it's very difficult.
I mean, Volvo could have like very deep pockets, as a big company, and potentially they could.
But you have a fixed cost and a variable cost. It's fixed cost you can cover through your margins over a period of time. Operational costs are running costs. They will always be there with you as long as you're operating. So it's very difficult to kind of recover your operating costs, because those usually are sunk costs. Once you have operated it, it's gone. And if you look at the cash flow point of view, these are the costs that you are incurring right now. The subscription revenue that you're going to get 5 years on the line, it's going to get discounted. So let's say most companies, for example, take like 10% discounting rate. So 10% discounting rate of cash flow after 5 years is that cash flow amount divided by 10 to the 1.1 to the power 5.
Lifetime value kind of calculation.
Yes, right? So 1.5. So that means so that $100 after 5 years is equivalent to $70 right now, or $60 to $65 right now. But what you're paying out right now in hard cash is your variable costs. So you need to balance that. It depends. If Volvo chooses to, if you want to really do it, you can do it. There's no law which says you should not do it or you cannot do it. But
I think everyone agrees that the best is if you can cover the cost from the start. But sometimes you need to make a
sometimes you have to do that, and then that's a strategic decision that you have to take knowingly. So you know that you're going to take that decision. You are going to, look at the POCs the companies do. So many pilots. I have done so many pilots. At a point of time, I start saying no to pilot. I said, I'm not going to do a pilot because it doesn't make any sense. But people invest in those, and those are sunk costs. So you have to be these are the things that you have to start thinking about very early in the monetization strategy.
Cool, and that I agree. That's an important thing to consider. But still, going back to this kind of short-term versus long-term balance in how you invest in things, and the marketing versus research kind of question, I would argue that a lot of companies are focused too much on short-term gains and too little on long-term. There are examples like the big tech giants, for example, that do so much long-term investments. But a lot of other companies are focusing so much on the next quarter, I would argue. Would you agree with that?
See, it depends on your cash flow situation. If I have deep pockets, I don't care about the cash flow. Why not? But most kind of company who don't have like a multi-million-dollar investment budgets, they need to kind of also focus on the cash flow. See, we say like cash flow is king. So it's at the end of the day, it's cash flow that kills you. So you have to be prudent about how you're managing your cash flow. And I believe that value, if you are really adding value, if you think you're adding value, then you should believe in it, and then you should create that long-term value. You should not focus too much on short-term, because if you're cashing out every time, you're not building any asset. It's like this. I put some money in a bank account, and every month I'm getting an interest, and I'm gonna using it for something. I'm spending it. My money is never gonna grow if I keep optimizing the short-term gains. But if I keep it, then they're going to compound. And the way it compounds in this kind of situation is that you build customer loyalty. You build word of mouth. You build your business assets. The assets themselves could become a good barrier to entry for other players, because you have so much data, you have so much experience. So that's building those assets, I think, should be the priority. Monetization, when I talk about monetization, building business assets should, I think, be the priority for most companies. Sometimes you might have to kind of take short-term decisions. So you say, okay, well, I am going to cash out part of it, but I'm still going to build. So let's say this 10% customer base, I want to cash out. I don't see these as my customers in the long term, but I still have to serve them. So that could also be a strategy. You don't have a single strategy for all the customers. You cannot differentiate between different customers who you want to have a long-term partners. There are some customers who prefer a transactional arrangement. Actually, they don't want to invest in the long term.
Right.
So depends.
Yeah. Cool. And this touch on another topic that is also dear to me, which is innovation and how to foster innovation in a company. And something I think a lot of companies are not doing properly. And it comes back a bit to the long-term versus short-term, but I do so often hear companies say, we only have to focus on the next quarter, and we have to cover the costs. And of course that's true to some extent. But if we take, some people say that innovation happens for the edge user or edge use cases. So the question then can become, for a company, should you focus on the main type of target audience that you have, the target type of users you have, and that's probably true, because that's really where the cash comes from. But how do you keep innovating? How do you keep being a leader in a field if you only keep focusing on the users that you have today?
That is a very, very, very good question. And I think and that's actually the real dilemma that most companies face. You're absolutely right. Because you need to keep the lights on, and then you have to keep with the customers. But I think there's always a part of, so GE had this 15% rule. So you spend like 15% of your time, paid time, to do innovation. The only risk that I have seen is that there is a very fine line between innovation and happy engineering.
What's happy?
Happy engineering is that I do it because I love it.
Okay.
Right. So it's
happy engineering.
Happy engineering.
Yeah.
I solve it because I can solve it. So it's either fueled by adrenaline or fueled by testosterone. But there is not much business value, and the only way I think to have this innovation continuously flowing into organization is to kind of complete the cycle of monetization. When you're close to the customer, when you're delivering, because I have learned, people, a lot of times we have gone through these interviews with the user interviews, and we do this, we get the user research and everything. You get a feedback, but the best feedback that I've got so far is when I've actually pitched something to the customer. If it is good, customer says, well, I am in, I want it. If it is bad, they say, get out. Right? And many times it happened that we actually did innovation in that process of serving the customer. We went into a segment where we had no idea about. Went to the first customer, took their feedback, and they said your idea is crap. Just forget about it. We came back, we modified it. For me, that's innovation. Then we went to the second customer. They said, okay, it's not that bad. We came back again and we modified it. And we went to the third customer. They said, it makes sense. By the time we go to the fifth customer, they said, okay, I want this. So what has happened was that the initial idea of the technology, what we had, that got repurposed into something completely different. At the same time, something that the customer was willing to buy into. Some of the products that we have now at Bosch, and they started in a very different way. I mean, it was designed for a different purpose altogether, right? But then when we started pitching this to the customer, we started doing this, talking to the customer, then we slowly started. I mean, that's something I loved about business development, because in the process of selling, we also ended up shaping the products into something that, and because it was very simple, you take this to a customer and in a very, very stupid way and say, hey, this is what it is, what do you think? And either they love it or they don't. And then sometimes they say, okay, I love it, how much does it cost? And then you're screwed, because then you have to go back and then do the value estimation. Then you have to calculate the value. What value are you adding? What we spoke about. So for me, this kind of innovation, which is connected to the market, which is connected to your customer, that is something which I think needs a lot of discipline, but I think it gives you, it pays you dividends big time. And you need to kind of invest in this. And it's a value-adding activity.
And if we turn the tables a bit and speak about monetization again, but perhaps more on the topic of why do people fail with monetizations? And I think you had a number of reasons for the lack of monetizations, right?
Yes.
Can you just elaborate, why do companies fail with monetizations?
So, okay. First one, which I find is that you always start with why, right? Do you have a compelling why in your organization, why we are doing this? And what happens is that most of the time, if you talk to people, and then this is where we were talking about earlier about the digital divide or the AI divide. Right. There are some part of the organization who are really scared about the change, right? Yeah. And there's another part of the organization who are very much enthusiastic, overzealous, I would say, right? So this, if you don't kind of put them together into a why are we doing this? Why is it so important? Why is it so urgent for us to do this? The people would want to be a part of this. Right now, people want to stay away from it. So you need to have a big common why that everybody understands. Second, I think, is lack of a shared language, that the business, the data, even within the business, different departments, even within data, different technologies, they speak different languages. There is no shared language, and the shared language is business objective. Why are we doing this? We want to achieve this by this. Everybody understands that, but you have to really market it. You have to sell this. Your job is not just to sell outside. You should also sell inside. You want to onboard people. Third thing, I call it the leadership re-education. And re-education, because I don't like the word when people say data illiterate, because I think those people are very smart people, and they are there because of their merit. But we should also understand where they're coming from. And most people who are in that position right now, they come from a deterministic, process-oriented culture. Right. They were post-IT. And if you are kind of fortunate enough to meet someone who has lived through that, then you know what pain and what fear they felt when their decision-making was taken away from them. Before the IT was there, everybody used to come them and they used to decide how it needs to be done. But then the processes were introduced and they started working on the process. Now we are at the similar juncture where the autonomy is being taken away from them because you want to distribute this autonomy to people on the front line. So they are scared. So they need to be they need to unlearn and relearn, but they need to be re-educated. Their experience is great. But the thing is, we don't live in that era anymore. We don't have one golden way of doing things. We don't have one target segment. We don't have one lean process. A lot of the process design that we have is actually coming from the industrial mindset, the Frederick Taylor's work, and the Toyota production way. But that is kind of changing because now you need more variability. Now you need more different ways to reach value. You need more path to value, and that becomes important. So that's the re-education part. Lack of business ownership, I would say. Right. We spoke about that.
And before we continue a bit, I think it's always nice to have some kind of concrete example. And perhaps we should continue with the Volvo use case. And I guess what you are speaking a bit about is when you say the why reason, is a why potentially to move more to a data or AI-driven organization?
The why is you are an automotive. I mean, Volvo continues to be an automotive company. I hope they have been an automotive company. They've been a car manufacturer. I hope they want to be a car manufacturer. How would this initiative or this product help them become a better car manufacturer? Right. Because many people, I kind of find it a little bit difficult to understand when people say we want to be a data-driven company, we want to be a data company. What do you exactly mean? Are you going to change? I mean, do you want to kind of change your business model? What do you really mean by that?
So I think actually what you say here is kind of important. It's sometimes dangerous to say we should just become data and AI driven. It should be driven by something else.
Yes, so your customers still want to buy car from you. They don't want to buy data from you.
Yeah.
What do you mean by you want to be a data company? So what did it say is, I mean, the way I like it is that one good leader said, he said, okay, we want to reduce the downtime of all our field equipment globally by 40% in the next 3 years. Now that sets a very concrete example, a direction for the organization, not just for the data and AI team. Of course, the data and AI team, they are working on the predictive models. They are working on getting the data and predicting when the machine is going to fail. But then the other part of the organization is also working on that mission, because then the field service is thinking about how can we make ourselves more agile? How can we have a quick response? The supply chain department is thinking about, okay, how can we manage the part availability and the tooling more efficiently? The legal team is saying, how do we manage the legal risk in a better way? That is something that need to happen. I mean, that tying together of different functions of an organization together towards the same objective, using data, leveraging data and AI. I think that's what monetization is about.
Okay, I'm not sure I followed exactly, but let me see if I try to phrase it what you said here. So the why in this case could be something about transforming a company from being a manufacturing company to becoming a service company in some way.
Could be. You don't want to build a product that takes the customer from A to B. You want to have a different way. You want to take them. This is a typical marketing myopia concept. How do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as an oil company, or do you see yourself as an energy company? Right. Do you see yourself as a transport services company? But then, because then it comes, a lot of other things come with it, right? So that definition is very, very important. What do you want to? How does this initiative fit into that vision? Someone says, okay, we want to be completely economic, we want to be carbon neutral, we want to be carbon negative, right? How does this help in that? So that way.
Okay, but define a why, and then we're really clear on what the reason for that need of change is.
Yes.
So on, right? So that's one. And then you spoke about the shared language in some way, and I certainly can agree with that. And business people speak in one way, engineer in another, data scientists in a third, and perhaps finance.
While they're talking about more or less, they're talking about the same thing.
Yes.
But still, you have so much miscommunication because
and
they use different terminology.
Each other properly. Yeah. So that's certainly true. And then the re-education and that can mean, if we take the transformation from manufacturing to service, I guess it's a lot of people that need to change how they work, right?
Yeah, you need to know what do you know about the service business. And first of all, if you want to go to a service, where do you start? You start with your customer service. But how many companies are doing that? Actually going and talking to their customer service and, hey, what do you think? If you want to be a service company, what do you think we should do? They know it. Nobody's asking them.
Cool. So re-education and the next step, what would that be?
Business ownership. I'll say that you need to the business needs to own this thing, because its time has gone when it used to be a data initiative or AI initiative. Now it has to be a business initiative. You need to own this thing. See, I understood, because I come from I told you about my second portfolio that I handled, which was data analytics. This first one was actually, I was handling engineering services. So basically you have like a lab like this, and I would rent it out to you and you pay me a fixed money. Yeah. So I come from a very traditional kind of business as well. I understand that as well. It is, until last decade, it was understandable that you did not understand it. Now it is so easy to understand and learn, right? You spoke about the podcast. I mean, there are so many different ways. You can YouTube. You can listen to a podcast. You can read. There's so much information available. I don't think there's an excuse that you can make and say, I don't want it, or I don't see a value in it. I think value of data and AI, I don't think there's a question about that. Everybody, we know that it is going to create a lot of value in the long term. So you have to better be on board. So then how much are the business leaders willing to adopt this? How much they are willing, and what is their mandate? Is data and AI on their goals? Is adoption on their goals? Is experimentation on their goals? So we need to change, also think about changing, how do we change their KPIs? How do we change, align their goals? Everybody at the end of the day works on what their goal sheet is. How do we align those goals towards becoming more data and AI oriented?
Yeah, and the ownership, if you just try to make that a bit concrete as well, I think it is a very important part. If you just force something upon people and they don't own it themselves, it will never really work, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
And if we were to try to describe it in this case, how, I guess someone could previously own a small part of the manufacturing chain that they have, or manufacturing lane that they have, and then they need to, if we simply force upon them to then start doing something else, that probably would be hard, right?
Yeah.
And what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, is we need to make sure that the ownership is pushed down throughout the organization,
yes,
so they own every part of it and will drive it themselves,
yes,
in the right direction,
yes,
in some way. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. That makes sense. Okay. Is that all the steps, or do you have?
And finally, this is a bit interesting. The total cost of ownership of our data and AI asset, and once we just calculated, like back of the envelope estimation. And this initiative, it was actually quite funny. I shouldn't say funny, but we came to a number which was like $15 million over 5 years. So we said to the customer that your total cost of ownership of this initiative, this data and AI, whatever you're building, is around 15 million euro. And they were like, yeah, but we don't agree to this, or we don't approve this. I said, you already have. Because whatever you have built over the last 2 years, I'm not taking any new development. I'm just taking those. Now you need to operationalize this, right? Now you need to train people. Now you need to take it out into the market, or ensure there's an adoption, or you integrate this into process. So there's a lot of downstream activities which you have not thought about. But the problem is, since you have invested €1.5 million in the last 2 years, now you're on a slippery slope. So now you cannot just one day say, okay, 1.5 million, no problem, let's go with it. So just by signing up on this, you have actually, without understanding the total cost of ownership of this initiative, you actually signed on to it. And I think this is another reason that organizations need to understand that there is a cost which is currently hidden, and I'll tell you how it is hidden. A lot of companies don't calculate the employee cost into the cost of the initiative. They take it out. The result is that the employee productivity suffers, because now they don't have an incentive. They are no longer visible in that to the finance. Many companies don't put their POC's costs. They don't put their their customer research costs into the initiative. If you do start doing proper cost accounting, you realize that you have spent a lot more than what you think you have, and you will continue to spend this money. How are you going to get this back? What's your plan? So that's something that is another reason why people not think of monetization.
So having more holistic understanding of the total cost
of ownership of the asset. And finally, I think the explainability and the risk. The other day I was talking to one of the guys, and he was building a solution that it's potentially, so it acts like a API gateway or a web server, proxy server, where if you select a particular search for a product, you will see a different price if you're in Stockholm, and you will see a different price if you're in Malmo. Yeah. Now, what are the implications of this, right? It is very easy if you're putting a completely black box AI system. It's right now you might be doing it based on location, but you never know what AI going to pick up. It might start differentiating based on color, based on age, based on gender. You don't know, because if it makes an assumption that all the people living here have high income, and that happens to be a certain ethnic group, and all the people living here have become a certain group, and they have lower paying ability and they have higher paying ability, you start, before you know it, you start introducing bias even without knowing it. Yeah. So this is kind of risk that the business owners need to understand and act on.
And how do you solve that? How do you avoid, having this kind of unknown biases being built into the system? You
should be careful. I said I'm not going to endorse this. This is risky. Legally, unfortunately, the law is silent on these things. They don't say you should do it or you should not do it. But then you should understand how biases build up and what will happen if this goes wrong. So I think this is the part of re-education, to understand really understanding risks of what could happen. And I would probably go and talk to someone like you and say, hey, what do you think?
I would like to jump into this. So, by the way, everybody who is watching today, Henrik is not here. So, Henrik, if you're watching, you're missing quite a lot.
This is also one of his favorite topics.
Yeah, exactly. So probably he's right now
sitting and jumping on his chair. He wants to interrupt, but he can't.
Yes, we are waiting for your what was it, like goosebumps type of timing. I think that before we go to the biases, I think that you mentioned a couple of interesting things here, but as well, it's a little bit confusing. Okay, because we need to break it down into pieces and that break it down into specific steps. And I think that you put this in the preface of what we have discussed before in the levels. So I will mention three things. So the first thing is like this monetization never picked up, right? The reason why it didn't pick up because it was never picked up by the senior management.
Yes.
Okay. So the first question is actually when it comes to data and AI deployment and innovation, if we are looking at CXO, operational, tactical level, who is pushing the innovation forward? Who is fighting that this is actually the breakthrough technology?
I think it's mostly the data teams. It's the data product managers, analytical managers who are trying to find use cases.
Okay.
And trying to push it to the business. That's the conversation that I've had with most people.
So maybe head of analytics, or you're talking about like data scientists purely?
Data scientists.
Okay. What about domain experts, business users, like the maintenance guy? Because you mentioned quite a lot of maintenance guys, right?
In my experience, they're still quite reactive to this. They're still not kind of pushing it proactive, still trying to understand. See, the thing is this, the people want to understand. If you're not open and transparent about what you want to do, then the risk is that people want to know where do they fit when everything falls down. So a lot of people have actually think that this could lead to loss of their jobs. Or maybe they don't see themselves fitting into this new ecosystem. But I have not seen business kind of leading. In very few cases, the business is actually leading this thing. So far, what I have experienced is that business is very reactive, and they're reacting to this. So the data guys comes and say, hey, I have got your data. I built this model. It can do this. Do you want to try it out? I say yes. I say no. I don't know. It depends upon how my mood is, right? And depends upon whether I see this initiative as something that will give me a promotion or something that will get me fired.
We will come back to that because I think that this was amazing topic that we have not discussed before, and I believe it's so true. But before we jump to this, so if we can answer very straightforward or in some kind of a consensus between all three of us, right? So who is leading right now the data and AI innovation in the organization? Tactical, operational, or CXO?
I'll say it's more tactical.
Okay, so more tactical. Good. So when we are talking about lack of, so why organizations are failing with AI monetization, and then you mentioned a couple of things, which is absence of common why. Who creates the why?
It has to be at the top management level.
Okay, so the CXO is making the why, right? Okay, so if the CXO is making the why, but the innovation is driven by the operation, the tactical level, so we have basically we don't even talk about the management, so we have like a huge gap because the why should be coming from the top, but the innovation and the people who are pushing for innovation, AI, data, is coming from the top, from bottom up.
Yes.
Then you mentioned shared language.
Yeah.
Who creates the shared language in an organization?
Shared language is coming when you start collaborating, when you start openly discussing. See, everybody at the end of the day, everybody has goals on their goal sheets, right? That is a shared language. Everybody understands those KPIs.
Yeah.
And if you see, if you compare the KPI of a marketing person versus a logistics person, you still can find that they talk about more or less the same thing. They are aligned. They have to be aligned. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's not possible that the sales guy get a target of selling 20% more, but the logistics guy does not get a target of pushing or basically storing 20% more. It's not gonna be possible.
Okay.
When you start talking about the business use cases and we start taking customer at the front and center, and you say, how am I gonna, if I do this initiative, right? If I want to do predictive maintenance, what is my customer gonna get? And how can you help Goran? How can you help Anders, right? That conversation is where everybody becomes involved in that process.
Okay.
How do I contribute to reducing, I gave an example, how do I contribute to reducing this 40% downtime? Everybody knows that, right? But we are not asking those people right now.
Yeah.
So the shared language can be created when we start talking about the same goals. And everybody will say, okay, this is how I can do it. And what I do is I say, okay, this is a piece of paper. If you agree to this, why don't you sign this?
Okay.
So you get people to sign on this and say, okay, I commit to this. You commit. And then you deploy together. So you need all hands on deck. You need to have that shared language. It will come when you start talking to each other about the same thing. Right now, everybody's trying to drive their own agenda.
Yep. Okay, we come back to that as well. Let's move on. So, absence of common why, that was a topic of CXOs.
Yeah.
Shared language is the topic of...
It's a change management topic. It's like...
business users, management, senior management. Okay, leadership, re-education you mentioned.
Yeah, so that's also CXO topic. They have CXO plus also mid-management. They also have to understand what they don't know.
Okay, lack of business ownership, I believe management.
Mid-management, yeah.
Okay, mid-management.
Mid-management, senior management.
Okay, and then underestimate TCOs and explainability risk.
Same. It's a business.
So, if we go now backwards a bit, right? So that means that the reason why we are failing actually with AI monetization is because we have a very immature type of organization where the CXO in the management team or the business part doesn't understand the capabilities or the opportunities coming with data and AI. So they are not pushing for this innovation rather than the innovation.
They don't own it. Ownership.
But how do you own it if you don't own it?
You own it because you commit to it. You see, okay, this you see that you're. I mean, if you look at it and you say, okay, I think this is a great idea which I can use for my business. That for me is own. So you don't allow you don't say, okay, this is somebody else's job. You say it is your job. Because you are the ultimate beneficiary of this initiative. It's not going to be someone else. If I adopt data and AI in my process to improve my business area, I am going to be the beneficiary. Who do you think should be owning it?
Yeah.
So that's the topic about ownership. It's not that they understand. Maybe there might be some difficulty in understanding how it works or what happens or how does it. But that's not important. Do you understand that it produces value? Do you understand that it gives you certain benefits? If yes, are you willing to commit to work? It's a hard work. It's transformation is not a tea party. It's difficult. You have to be willing to redesign your process. You must be willing to let go of your control.
Sure. Okay, good. I give that to you. It's a good point. But would we agree that if the innovation is coming from the tactical level, data scientists, the people who are actually working with this technology, right? And we have absence of common why from the CXO. We have... we need leadership re-education of data literacy, CXO data literacy that we are talking about. Then how do we actually solve this? Because these initiatives, especially when we're talking about AI monetization, cannot come from a data scientist. It has to come from the top.
Yeah.
Okay. Or top. Yeah. I'm not sure. But okay.
Continue. No, I mean, please do.
Yeah.
No, I certainly agree that today, in many cases, it does come from the top. Especially when it comes to AI change, that is usually pushed down from the top. And in some, I would argue that it's a bit sad. I mean, so you can say, who is pushing, but who should really be pushing? I think, the day when a company can have a data and AI chain being pushed from the domain expert, being pushed from a team that is owning a specific part of a service or a product. And they say, we need to make a change. We need to be more AI and data-driven. That is really when the big scale-up would happen.
Exactly.
Right? So even though it may be pushed today from CXO when it comes to why, I think that the big change will really happen when it's being pushed from the domain expert, from the owners.
Right? Agree. Yes. 100%.
Yes.
And the reason why it's not happening because we very easily let people off the hook. And we not would a CXO or CEO or whoever, would they expect any kind of shortcoming when it comes to their other goals? Would you accept if a procurement manager is not able to deliver on their saving goals, or a sales manager is not able to deliver on their revenue goals? Would you accept that? You will not let them off the hook. But why do we let them off the hook when it comes to the data and AI? When you know that this is going to deliver you dividends multiple times the investment, but it needs hard work, and somebody has to put it. It's not going to happen on its own.
Okay.
Yeah, and I still love I think I mentioned it before, the manufacturing example of the floor grinder. So this was a manufacturer, a big Swedish manufacturer, and they had a domain experts that were building a certain machine, a floor grinder, and they could easily, when the human was driving it and testing it out and was operating the machine, they could easily just hear by listening to the machine that something weird is happening now. It's going to break down soon. If we don't do service on it soon, it's going to break down. And then someone came up with the idea of why not simply make this data driven? Why not put a microphone on the device, on the machine, and start collecting some data and training a model, and then do a prediction saying it probably it's time to do a service on a machine to have some predictive maintenance on it. And that was very easily done. And the really big thing I think in this case is it wasn't dependent on a centralized data science team or analytics team. It wasn't dependent on or forced on by CXOs. It was really, driven by the team itself, responsible, owning the machine, and they could, simply say, I can, as human, understand this is something that happens. Can't we simply collect some data and build a model to it? And I think, when that starts to happening throughout the organization, that's really, amazing, I think, right?
Yeah. And actually, this, one I'm going to add one comment to it. I think Sweden, I believe, is very well positioned for this data-driven transformation, because already the first part of the problem is kind of taken care of. You already have that distributed autonomy, and people are empowered to make their own decisions. If you think about the cultures and companies who have more hierarchical, where the information goes all the way up and the decision comes all the way down, they are going to struggle big time, because again, and we already see it, in COVID, during COVID, when managers are so used to seeing their people, in front of them, and then kind of gives them some kind of a boost, ego boost. When they had to let go, because you cannot work from the office, people struggled with that. People struggled with letting go. And it's going to same thing is going to happen with very hierarchical companies, hierarchical cultures. That the whole information loop is going to be disrupted, and data and AI is going to do that. That's its job. If you want to be agile, you have to reduce the reaction times, and the only way to do it is to actually take the decision making to the front line, because they are the first respondents. If they decide and if they are able to take action, then you have agility. If you have to wait for someone to approve, then what's the point actually doing it? Because you still take the same amount of time.
Okay, so we are in agreement that the innovation should be starting from bottom up.
Yeah,
is that what you're saying? Like the 3M model, and
I think it's dangerous if it only happens from the top. I think the best case scenario is if it's happening everywhere, right, in every level. But at least it should be happening from the bottom up, I think, as well.
And the top needs to support that.
Yeah, and I agree on that. And if there is a number of cases actually that I spoke recently about with some people about this. It's very good. But if you're looking at the market right now and what is selling and what the consultancy companies are doing and many other people are talking about, is actually the AI-driven transformation. This is the biggest hot. So when the biggest hot topics right now. And if we are talking about, like when you said like AI monetization never became a topic of interest, is because it was too early.
Too early.
It was too early.
Yeah,
okay, because
too early.
let's do some small summary of the past 5 years. What happened in data science and machine learning, right? 2015, data scientists come on stage. Everybody thinks he's a magician, so he can do everything. You remember at that point of time, we were talking about finding the right data scientist. Nobody was talking about data science as a function. I had the privilege to speak with Anders and then meet Carl Sved from Schibsted and etc. and started discussing like, this is a function. We have seen this all before, right? So the advanced analytics function starts to develop and all of these other things. We are moving to machine learning and the rest of the stuff. So in the past 5 years, organizations have went through this experimentation phase where they have actually found the right people, tested the right POCs or maybe the wrong POCs. It doesn't matter. They have had some kind of experimentation, figure out how this works, what is actually a hype, what is not, how the strategy should look like, what thing actually can fly in the organization? How can we sell this in the organization? Which is even the most important part in this whole thing, because if you cannot sell it, you cannot use it. So we have the people, we have the processes, we have the technology. Now we need the why.
Yeah.
So if the why stays in the CXO suit, which we were discussing before, then we have a problem. So if we autonomize the bottom-up approach, so basically like the 3M, where the innovation was coming from, the post-list and etc., was coming from this 15% innovation time that 3M gave them in the beginning of the 19th century or whatever, 20th century, etc. Maybe it's good, but how? Right now, the question is, so it's still confusing. Because everybody's talking about that now is the time for AI transformation. You're saying that this is a CXO problem, but we all know that this should be driven from bottom up. So who is right, who is wrong? And how do we actually make it work?
I'm not saying that it's only the CXO problem, because most of the things when we talk about the lack of business ownership.
But it's the why problem, right? This is like, so...
I think I can phrase it in a different way, and I can contextualize it a bit. And if you take a big tech company in Sweden or a company that is at least very technology driven from the start, and they have product owners, for example, that are in charge of a certain piece of a functionality in some service, and they have 15 years of experience in how this service works, and they know what users will like and will not like and can drive the change because of their experience. And then someone comes in and say, why not be data driven? It's a hard sell to make the people change. So, in thinking about change management here, and what a lot of people say is not only the technology, it's perhaps mainly the people and the organization that needs to change. Of course, the technology needs to change as well, but the hard thing is, I would argue, potentially the people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But then see the culture. I mean, how many companies really foster this? I actually read a quote. It says that if you want to succeed, double your failure rate.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's failing fast. Yeah.
And I thought this is probably from Jeff Bezos, because he talks about experimentation quite a lot. Yeah. But you wouldn't believe this is from Thomas Watson from IBM. And this goes back at least 50 years. So the thinking has been there. How much of that has percolated today?
I think it's another T-shirt. If you want to succeed, double your failure rate. I love that quote.
By the way, we need to talk about this T-shirt because it's time to order them. I found a person. Yes, please continue. My point with all of this is because you have this monetization works on several levels. Yeah, that was my point. To coming back.
The reason why CXO, I'll tell you. I'll just continue this, because ultimately someone has to take accountability. AI system will not gonna be like 100% accurate from day one. There are gonna be mistakes. Someone has to own that. Let's say you get a recommendation that you should ship a certain product, right? Now you have a real cost associated with it, and if you have a real cost associated with not doing something, let's say it's 98% accurate. Who owns the 2%? If something goes wrong, will I own it as a line manager? Or do I need the CEO to own it? Who should enable that? That enablement.
But then it's a question is if this is good to have or nice to have, or good to have or must have.
No, how else would you kind of?
But it's like let's say, so I'm a business owner, right? As a business owner, you calculate risks on everyday basis. Everything that you do, you start a project, you just calculate the project. You calculate the risk, right? So like we have this project, we have ambitions, we want to succeed. Let's go ahead with it. I have already calculated my risks that in worst case scenario, this is going to happen. So if I'm not, accepting the risks or not accepting the risk, I'm just basically playing around with the risk. It's like this is not going to affect me that much. Do I take these things seriously or not?
And so what you said is supposed to happen. I also thought it is supposed to happen, and yet we see companies who have investing on data and AI for last 2 years, and they still don't know what the hell they are building.
Yes, because they are experimenting, and this is positive. It shouldn't be negative, but there is no why. But they have actually in these 2 years probably found probably identified how they can work, what works for them, is this technology for them, which technology they should use again. So I think this is not completely negative.
Not completely negative, but at the point of at some time in this journey, you need to start aligning yourself. The problem is that if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there.
Yes.
So if you don't know what you are building, on what basis do you know whether what you've done is right or wrong?
Yes.
If you don't have a North Star, right? If you don't have some kind of value estimate, how do you benchmark yourself? How would you even know after 5 years? Let's say you experiment for 5 years. What do you benchmark yourself against? If you don't have any framework to measure, so you're like space. You're floating in space with your eyes closed. How the hell do you know what is north, what is south, where you are? You cannot. You need to have a frame of reference. You need to have something to look at and then define yourself with that benchmark. And I'm saying, do companies have that benchmark? Do they know what they're building? Do they know at least where they are aiming towards?
Do they need to?
How else would you know if you're? How else would you know if you're improving or not?
That is true.
So you need to have some kind of a board.
If you're aiming to excellence, but if you're aiming on the experimentation.
Yeah, but then the question: when does the experimentation ends, and when does the
work begins? This is the topic that we need to go into, because this is a very important. My part of this was that I believe that today we are finding ourselves in a time where this is actually everything comes to place. We have had the time of experimentation. Now it's time for monetization.
Yeah.
But as you're saying, it's right now the AI topic becomes a topic not of a data scientist, becomes a topic of data literacy and competence of leaders to identify the potential of this technology and utilize that in the organization.
Yes.
So how do we come there?
It's also another dimension to it. I mean, one thing is that the technology has been really mature for a long time, and it's been exploding in recent years, and there is ways to do things that was never possible before. But I think the other aspect is a lot of people confuse the normal type of software engineering to AI engineering, and the two, to build an AI-enabled system is very different, I would argue, than to build a traditional system, and especially because of the huge dependence on data.
Yes.
And if you don't have the data dependence, the large data dependence that AI systems has, it's easier to plan and to know what will happen when you spend a sprint on building something.
Yeah.
But in AI that is super dependent on the data, you don't know until you tried it. You need to try and build a model on the data, and only afterwards you can say if it did have the predictive power or not to actually be useful. So I would argue that the need for exploration and experimentation will continue, and they need to expand it and double it. And I think what you said. If you want to be successful, double your failure rate is extremely true, especially in the age of AI.
So what you said. So basically, if you know where you're going with general direction, you don't have to be very specific. But if you know in general direction, then it gives you more flexibility to explore and experiment, because then you can build guardrails and say, hey, I am not going to maybe invest too much time if I go beyond this threshold. Then probably I should try something else. Right now, there are no guardrails at all. And that becomes a worry, because then what happens if you don't have any guardrails? The difference between innovation and happy engineering is very, very fine. Very easy to go into a rabbit hole and do something just for the sake of it.
I like that, the happy engineering. I believe that is what I was explaining. I think that many companies have been on happy engineering until now. So
because it feels good, I can build some cool stuff. But yes, how is that solving? Because every day, every minute, you are spending money. How much? When are you actually creating value? And that comes from accountability. That comes from ownership.
Okay, so if we stop here, and then so now we have identified a number of challenges, and we have identified that basically there are a number of layers of innovation, and who is driving the innovation and how they should be looking into a future. So let's make like a concrete step, and let's take the Volvo example, okay? Because I believe this is a very good example, right? It's a huge organization. They have a huge amount of money that they can spend on experiments, right? And including AI or business models, because part of being a company is actually exploring other business models, right? So some will succeed, some will fail. How many projects that Google has as a failure?
Yeah, insanely large.
Right? Okay, so I don't think that is negative. So
No,
let's build a
that's a really
monetization
positive thing.
plan for a company that is traditional, because what we are talking today is not actually about how to monetize on AI, because AI should be for good.
Yeah.
Right? There is no question about it. But what we are discussing today is how actually a traditional company can move from that traditional type of business to algorithmic business.
Yeah.
Okay? Not data-driven business that we also discussed that might not be so suitable for so many companies.
Sorry,
Right?
if you can put up Kill by Google website, by the way, it's fun to see all the products
Let's do that.
that Google has killed. It's like insanely large number of products, and these are products that they actually move to production. It's not prototypes you're speaking about.
Let's say
Killbygoogle.com.
But there's a concept called idea mortality rate in innovation theory, and it says that the more you are able to kill,
Yes.
more innovative you are.
Exactly.
Because you're not spending money where it does not belong.
Yeah,
But
so
I will
this-
put this in on the stream's link as well, so people can see it actually. So
and we can scroll down, and it never stops scrolling. It's so many products here. It's like insane. You can just scroll forever here, and and you can recognize some of them. So many you don't know about, but and you're not. You can see the scroll bar. You're not even in the.
yeah. I mean,
It's funny.
but this is good. You see, I mean, if we are looking into becoming something like this, you also need to be capable of doing something like this.
Yeah, exactly.
Kill your darlings and early type of point. And it's like 2013. This is 6 years project. YouTube for Nintendo 3DS. Huh?
That requires courage to kill projects, and that was a problem in IoT. That was a problem before that in general innovation in NPD. That was a problem. Now you cannot kill your darlings because it's your baby. To get too attached to it. Someday it will grow up and do something. Maybe not.
Maybe. Okay, but let's get concrete right now. So we go from challenges, which basically we accomplished, I think, quite well. And now let's move to the business value. How do we actually help, let's say, Volvo monetize or move to algorithmic business? How they can see the potential of monetization with AI?
So, I mean, something, for example, if I would like to define something that I want to increase my service revenue by 20% or 30% in the next 3 years using the real-time data from the vehicles and kind of increase my penetration by 20% in my current customer base or a new customer base. So something that is specific, but at the same time something that is a business objective that relates with their business model, with their identity as a company, so that not just the data science teams or not a data team, but everybody in the organization can relate to it. Many companies had this vision 2020, so rest in peace. But see, you need something.
I had an event called Data 2020. Now it's called Data 2030.
So a lot of 2020 became 2030. And if you see, I mean, I don't have a statistic on this, but if you have a very definite goal, right, people are more likely to follow it. People are more likely to identify themselves with it. Because then you put that problem on the table, and then you don't tell people what they should do. You say, hey guys, this is the problem that we are trying to solve. What can you do? And let people come up with theirs. Data science will of course do their part, but everybody else should also do their part as well. So that is, I think, in my opinion, the starting point.
So a common goal or
a common, well-defined, very specific goal that creates a measurable outcome. Because if you say 40% or 20% increase in service revenue, it's measurable.
Yes.
The value of that goal is also measurable. If you say if you can increase service revenue by 20%, and then we have, let's say, 5,000 customers as subscribers to Volvo Cars, this network, that value is also measurable. What is not measurable if you don't define anything? And then you have nothing to measure. If you can't measure, you can't control.
Okay, but you take like a big vision. Let's say
Specific vision. It could be small, but it should be specific.
Okay, good. So, but if we are taking now, let's say, like a company, and they need to move to they want to start monetizing with AI, right? And we are talking about this common goal. Let's say that.
Sorry, I just have to let the person in.
Yeah, just
I'll be
don't
back
worry.
in a few minutes.
So this is how actually the podcast should look like when people start jumping in. No, my point was here. So basically, let's take like a common big goal. So you have a traditional company that actually right now wants to become a data-driven company or start monetizing an algorithmic business, and they say like Danfoss did, Grundfos. We are not an engineering company anymore. We are a water company, right? It's completely redefining the way how you actually see yourself.
And that goal then kind of percolates in everybody. What do I do as an innovation head? What do I do as a sales head? What do I do as a marketing head, as a legal head, as a commercial head? That percolation is happening because then you start relating to that goal.
Yeah.
And you try to say, okay, what can I do? That's when you start, that's when the collaboration happens, because now you know I cannot do it on my own, but I have to do something.
Yeah.
And that is where the shared language is created, because now you need to collaborate with others. So you have all hands on deck.
Yeah.
That's second step. You get everybody in. Third is then you start building this culture of experimentation, because you know you're going to fail. So better fail fast.
Okay.
And fail small.
So now we are talking about completely opposite approach, which is basically from top to bottom, where we have a common goal now distributed or shred into smaller pieces and then moved around the organization. So everybody has a common goal to go to, but they basically need what they need to do in their domain expertise. And now it comes to the innovators basically to innovate it, right?
That's my view.
Okay.
Of course, I mean, Anders has a different... The way I can kind of put it together is that if you have a common goal, right, then I can decide as a domain owner how I want to achieve that. So you have innovation, you have a direction coming from the top management that says this is where we want to go specifically, but then the way the how is actually coming from the domain owners or the business owners, and they say how can I add to that? And it's important that you take a large goal. You cannot take, I'm going to improve this by 5%. It's not going to cut it. You need to have it like 40%. People should really start thinking, okay, this is crazy. Because only then they will come together. Otherwise, they won't come together.
I like this. You don't like this, but this is
Yeah,
more like
that,
Steve
sorry.
Jobs. This is a little bit more Steve Jobs. Like when you start.
I don't think I like it anymore. If you say that.
Yeah, the goal is too big. So like, okay, let's move.
Let's make a dent in the universe.
I think that it actually works, because if you give people a larger vision, they actually assemble to it.
You need to have a sense of urgency, and you need to have a timeline. It's okay. It's 3 years.
Yeah. We are at 1:38, and we have a couple of topics actually that you mentioned here, and Anders will correct me with this. And I think that it was great for you to mention. The first one is that basically technology monetization strategy bridges technology assets with business opportunities. Yeah. What do you mean by that?
What I mean is, first of all, the word is the asset. And the why it's asset, because when we spoke about the ownership of data and AI, then the responsibility, in my opinion, of the data team is to build the data and AI to an extent such that it can stay alive outside its lab environment. And that's when we talk about operationalizing it. So you are one step after the typical POC or typical model, but then you are one step before building it into a product. So imagine like you have a chassis and your engine, and then you have a steering, right? But then you can repurpose it into different ways. So that is what I define as an asset. I still don't have a very concrete definition, but asset is something that is between a model and a full defined product. Something that can be owned. The qualification for the asset is that it should be able to you must be able to operate and own it independently. It has a cost function, and it has some kind of a value function, right? And then it is sustainable. If you give the business something which kind of defines or kind of defines in this kind of satisfies this requirement, then they can own and operate it. One good way to do that, for example, if you see with the safe implementations, Many companies have created the BIO organizations. So you have business information officers. So the IT is kind of moving in along with business, right? And they are kind of creating their own portfolio. So something like this. How can we take the models and the assets that are being, or basically the models and the data sets that are being developed by the data teams, but how do we kind of personalize this within the business, or incubate this within the business? That's what I say about, that's what I mean by a data and a technology asset. An asset is something that can be owned and operated on its own. And the second part is then the business opportunity. Is then you have kind of, imagine that you have like different ingredients or different data products or the data assets, and then you can combine them in different ways to create products and services at the end. So that's what the business opportunity is. So somewhere in the data strategy or the AI strategy, we need to, the data teams need to build, operationalize AI and hand it over to the business. So this handover is required. And then the business should be able to independently work with them and deploy them in different ways to create different products and services.
Yeah, okay, that's on. Cool, and it's getting time to soon move into more philosophical topics, I think. Mm-hmm. We have already touched, we started with meditation, and I think it would be fun to end with that as well. But I have one more business-oriented question first before we move into that. And I know you also work a lot with startups. And if someone that is thinking or has just started with a startup is listening to this, and you would try to give them some advice, in especially when it comes to data and AI, what would you advise them to do or not to do in their early days of the startup?
Okay. I would say that number one, don't get infatuated by technology. Yeah. That's a very dangerous trap to be in. Cool. You should focus on the business value.
I like that a lot, and basically saying, you shouldn't focus on the technique itself, but the use case or the end user experience.
Be shameless while going to the customer. And I think I read somewhere that if you're not sacrificing the user value, or if you're not sacrificing quality for speed, your competitor will be serving your customer. So you need to be shameless, and you won't believe what kind of products and solutions I have taken to my customers. They were ridiculous, and I had to cover them with beautiful slides somehow, because the POCs, sometimes 2 times, I went to the same customer for the demonstration, and the demonstration didn't work. Right? So that things will happen, but you have to be shameless. But be in a very, very close contact with your customer. Understand their business model. Understand their budgets. Understand how they're spending money. And most importantly, I think this is cool. User value is not equal to the business value, because the technical user is not the same as the technical buyer is not the same as the economic buyer. You have to understand how an economic buyer thinks, right? Economic buyer will think in terms of investment.
What do you mean with economic buyer, by the way?
Let me give an example. So let's say let's say you have a great model, that's an engine, and then you put that into a brilliant product. That's, let's say, a vehicle or a Ferrari. Yeah. So the user value is this Ferrari goes from 0 to something in so many seconds, and it looks very sexy. It has the nice exterior, and you have this great seat and a music system, etc. That's the user value. Now, business value asks the question: what are you going to do with that Ferrari? Now, if I come to you as an investor and say, "Hey, I want to deliver hot food anywhere in Stockholm in 10 minutes," right? How long do you think it's going? And I will pay you back with my profits. How long do you think I will take to pay you back for the cost of the Ferrari, which probably cost maybe a few millions, right? At the same time, if I say, you know what, I'm an experienced race driver. I know how to participate in legal races. So far, my average is that I win like 4 races out of 10. But with this vehicle, I can make like 6 or 7 races out of 10. And I make comfortable 2 million every year. Right? So now you have a business case. But this business, not the business value is you say, okay, I'm going to get my ROI in so many time. But it also in turn impacts the user value, because then you say, okay, you want a racing vehicle. Why do you want a shiny print? I want to put stickers because I want to monetize the exterior. I want to have more safety. I don't want a music system. I want to have a PA system. So the user value is actually impacted by the business value. But I have not seen many design thinking workshops where the economic buyer is a target persona. It's very, very rare.
Okay, so let me just elaborate a bit more on that. But because sometimes you hear, especially these kind of big social media companies, at least claiming that the primary KPI for them is user experience. even if it means losing money in improving the user experience, they will do it in some way. And if I were to just speak on their behalf, so to speak, and in why they're doing this, is because sometimes it's hard to know what the business value will be in the long run.
Yeah.
But as long as you're optimizing for the user experience, it will be what wins in the end in some way.
I'm saying sacrifice user value, not user experience. Okay. User value basically means that you don't get fancy seats, but you get comfortable seats. It's not that I'm going to put a chair, but you actually, and you are reducing the number of features essentially, but you're not kind of sacrificing the quality of those features. Sometimes you have to, because if you want to really validate your idea, but in general, I say you should give the best user experience, because that's where customers will benchmark you. Yeah. But you should sacrifice user value in terms of what is the total offering. Start with something simple. Start with something that is simple, it works, and is hopefully beautiful. In fact, a lot of times in the assignments, we onboard the UX person very, very early. Even before, not because you want to design something, but you understand the user. Sometimes your psyche of your users. You're building something for a truck driver. You have to understand that they are not very well. They're not college educated. You have to make things simple for them. That is something.
As long as you play Lasse Stefans to them, they will be happy, I think.
Yeah.
That's another
but that way. So sacrificing user value is more about sacrificing the non-essential, and to focus on, give a great experience on what is there. What's truly important.
Cool. And
now, do you agree?
I like it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point. So, and startups, it's so hard, and 99% fail more or less.
The problem is when startups start thinking like big companies. If they think like startups, and if they remain humble and if they remain lean, it's not gonna be. And I have experience. I have been very humble coming from Bosch. It was very, very difficult to justify. Yeah. But you have to be fast. Yeah. So startups start thinking like big companies. They'll be in trouble.
You have to be fast. I think.
What do you mean by that?
That means you start thinking about things that are not really essential to you. Branding.
Example.
For example, you don't need to have a very fancy marketing event. For example, you don't need to spend on building exclusive. Let's say build a product in like 5 different languages. If it is important, you should do it. But then you should not do anything that does not really add to a functional value. Functional utility, at least initially. Aesthetics will come later. But the design should be, because Steve Jobs did not just focus on aesthetics. Steve Jobs focused on the design simplicity. The overall, the way things connected with each other. And that you see in Apple, that is still there in Apple. They just fit together seamlessly. So that's what I'm saying. You stop thinking like start having a salesperson. I think a CEO should pitch more often.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of startups.
We are in a startup mode right now with one of the companies, and it's super interesting.
Yeah, a lot of startups said, okay, we want to hire a sales guy. What for? You are supposed to pitch. You know the product more than anybody else.
And I like what you said, be fast, because I remember one time in Spotify as well, and we were super scared about Apple. And Apple has just launched their first music service.
iTunes.
No, it actually wasn't the first, probably the 3rd or 4th music service, because they had iTunes and other stuff. But they launched the first like streaming service similar to Spotify at that time, and everyone in Spotify was super scared, And then Daniel Ek, who is an awesome CEO who can explain things, and also actually is an engineer, which is really nice. I think he could say a thing that I think everyone was really happy to hear and calmed everyone down. Because, how can you compete with Apple? They were the most valuable company in the world at that time. They had so much money and capital that, no one more than countries have. How can you even compete with a company like that? But he actually said something you said now, which is, being fast. And they said, we can move faster than any company can when it comes to music streaming. And I think that's, what every startup should think about. They can move so much faster than any big company ever can.
Yeah.
As long as they specialize in their functionality. And that is the winning strategy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
In this, so let's finish the topic on monetization by, so if you would summarize the entire monetization of AI concept in, let's say, 5, 6 steps and etc. How this would look like?
Okay. So the first thing is, I'll say, start with the business objective. Start with quantifying business value. It's a great value in quantifying value. You need, if you are able to put that in dollar terms. I'm not talking about the philosophical, like the value of life, but usually when you are
topic otherwise.
Yeah, but when you are kind of evaluating different options or different strategies, then it's possible to quantify them, kind of compare them against one another. Quantify the risk as well, and then decide what kind of decisions you need to make, and that decision then become the input for what kind of prediction you need to make, and what kind of data you need, and what kind of technology you need, and go backward. It's going to give you clarity. And my experience is, even if you're off by 15-20%, you're still okay, because you have clearly written down your assumptions and hypotheses. If something goes for a toss anytime in between, you can always come back and revisit your assumption, and why did you fail? This didn't work. We assumed this to be like that, but it was not like this. It's, even if you're lost, you will still be able to find your way out. That's number one. Number two, you need to have all hands on deck. You cannot do it alone. You cannot, organization cannot build a product with just R&D. So you cannot build a digital business just with the data team. You need to have all the hands on deck. Number three, you need to foster the culture of experimentation. You need to have failure tolerance in your organization. If people are not failing fast enough, if they're not taking risks, if they're not experimenting, then very soon you will run out of ideas. And the biggest problem with innovation is people go with what comes in the top of the mind, and everybody does that. So your competitor will also be thinking about the same ideas, and it's not a coincidence that everybody kind of comes up with a more or less similar offering, because they go with the top of the first idea that pops into their head, right? If you have culture of experimentation, you will experiment more. You will ask people to fail more. Fourth, I would say, is to start dealing with data and AI as strategic assets. Don't start thinking as byproduct, but business should start owning them. It's their property. I was very happy to look at the data mesh article, because I said, okay, architecture aside, finally you cannot say anymore, you don't have an excuse. You have to own this. Distributed data ownership, now you have to own this. Finally, you cannot make excuse. So they have to own these assets. It's their assets, because they are the beneficiaries, right? Fifth, I will say, is need to invest in building business capabilities, building your business infrastructure. That means you need to have an agile go-to-market. You need to be able to reach to your customers very, very fast. You need to be able to adjust your pricing in a very fast way. And you need to have the system to enable you that. Many companies, they want to do a service. They don't have a subscription system. They don't have a billing system. They can't meter how much, they can't meter the usage. So start building these things. These systems also take time. And finally, think about commercialization and monetization from the beginning, because again, my experience, it is not possible to plug in a monetization strategy without impacting customer experience. If you are giving something for free, and you're not setting the expectation in the mind of the customer that you will charge for it, some point of the time when you want to start charging for it, customer will have a bad taste in their mouth. So you need to set that expectation right from the beginning.
What do you think about the valuation of like Instagram or Facebook, etc., that basically in the beginning had no commercialization at all or monetization strategy at all, and then still had like multi-billion of
because the product in Instagram and Facebook are us, right? So they will find a way. I mean, most of the thing, they started. I mean, if you see, they had something in the back of their mind. So you still have advertisement, you still have those things. I'm not very familiar with.
I think that's the point. Yeah. I mean, they did have a commercialization strategy in the beginning. It's just that people didn't realize it. It's just that
it's a backup.
It wasn't
or they didn't, and the investors saw the potential how they can turn it.
If you have seen that social network,
the Price Runner. Another Price Runner. It was like a Trustpilot, I think. It was, which was one of these that recommends the flights and etc.
Expedia?
No, the other one.
Trustpilot?
Trustpilot. Let's say, so if I'm wrong, please excuse me for that. So there was this huge article about this topic, right? So at the beginning, the company goes completely like in minus, right? Investor comes in, they bring a revenue manager. The revenue manager, in 1 year, basically makes the company fly so they can start generating money. So you don't have to know exactly, where it is, but maybe the potential investor will come. So like, I see the potential here, and then they take it from there.
If you've seen the movie Social Network, then they say that they had advertisement in their mind from the beginning. And Mark says, I know this is to be done, but I will not do it right now. So they actually postponed that strategy to 5 years later until they had a good enough, because for a social media to work, you need to have enough connections.
Do you think that really they had the strategy, or some of the investor came to them, so like, where is your money? And then it's like, what can we sell here?
But would you invest in something that does not have a monetization potential at all? You might have some idea. It might be low, big, high, whatever, but you need to have some idea, right?
My argument is, did I had the idea, or the company owner had the idea?
How does it matter?
It doesn't matter, actually. Yeah, it's good. I would. Was that all?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Last topic. The AI divide in enterprise. Shoot.
Okay. Yes. So the unfortunate situation right now is that we have there are people who the access to data and ability to use data is become the source of political power, and which I think is quite dangerous. And the data analyst, people who have the analytical insights, they are the new elites, right? And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have people who do not have access to data, but and who don't have the skill to use the data. And this is a very, very dangerous situation for any organization, because eventually what's going to do is, number one, it's going to divide the organization. And number two, what we're talking about, the citizen development, citizen innovation and distributed innovation, you cannot have that if 70% or 80% of your employee base is not even engaged in this topic. So I think the leader's job, or the leader's role is, or the CDO role is actually, in my opinion, is to be more of a change manager and to include people. Inclusion is a very, very important topic right now. Of course, you have bias and if you have ethics and you have explainability, but I think inclusion is more important, because you cannot leave a large majority of people behind.
It's interesting because we have spoken about AI divide a number of times before, and we usually speak about the global AI divide between companies, which refers to the big tech giants mainly, and that are using data and AI to an extent, and then that is extreme, and then you have the majority of the rest of the companies that are not using it at all. But the same situation, as you say, exists within companies as well.
Yeah, and I know this because I told you, when I was doing the business development, I've spent a lot of time on actual manufacturing plants and actually retail stores and warehouses, and I've spent time with the people there. You won't believe, a lot of people have a job of actually doing like this, putting a button, checking this. Those people are going to be left out because they are so used to taking orders. They become so much of order takers that they are not really. You cannot teach them accountability in 1 year. You have to actually reach out to them and show them the data. Ability to many times companies are rating their employees based on certain data that they're calculating, and employees don't understand that data. That's a very, very dangerous situation.
So another T-shirt, not show me the money, you cross over the money and show me the data, right? That should be.
Yeah. And when you're building one of the product, we said the data has to be available, especially to people about whom that data is. They need to understand what it means. They need to be able to interpret it. And because the first iteration when we built the product, the data product, it was all graphs and it was all medians and modes, and those guys are not going to understand that, and you are going to rate them on it, or you're going to evaluate them on that data. I think that's a very dangerous situation that we'll get into.
So what is the solution? We make people more literate, or
we have to reach out to people, understand how where they are on this data. Okay, data literacy is actually a good term for this
maturity scale. We can say
this kind of skill set.
That's cool.
But really find out where they are in that scale, and then you need to slowly and sustainably bring them up into the different. So at least they should be able to understand.
So it's the 90s. We are educating people how to use a mouse and a computer. I guess that is how it is.
The same thing.
Yeah,
the same thing.
We were talking about this actually, and I think that this is actually where the most of the efforts in the AI area should go in the next 10 years.
And that
it's
is where
repurposing, re-education of not only executives, like we
But
mentioned in the beginning,
everyone.
but actually everyone.
Everyone. And that's where the total cost of ownership, if your total cost of ownership does not include this training effort, it will eventually fail, because it's those people who will execute your strategy. Because AI is just the brain. It will keep giving you signals. Who's going to act on it? If you're not building the body, so it's like the Matrix. I have downloaded how to do Kung Fu or karate, but my body is not prepared for it, right? How long do you think I'm going to stay in a fight?
I think, learning people about data and AI can be done
good.
in so many ways. And people think that they have to understand the exact internals of how big AI works or AI model works.
You don't.
And I think, you can do the analogy with horses and cars. And, if you imagine you just know about horses and you want to understand the value of having cars, then, you only need to understand, how you use them.
Yeah.
You don't need to understand how the engine works. And I would argue the same with AI.
It's the same thing.
But as long as you understand the value and how you use AI, not necessarily how to build it.
And risks.
And risk, then we are in a good situation.
Then we are in a good situation, yeah.
Good.
Should we, I'd love to have, end in the same way as we,
question, yeah.
but we're basically up, end of time already. But I'd love to end as we started a bit, and speaking a bit about meditation. So when you go to sleep tonight and you do some meditation, I guess, will you, can you just elaborate? How do you do practically to get started? Do you lay down? Do you sit in some kind of position, or how do you get started?
I sit like this and put kind of my feet on top of each other.
Yes.
It's called Sukhasana in the yoga terminology.
Okay. Yeah.
Put my hands like this. So this is one of the mudras called the hand mudra.
Yeah.
Put like this and just relax. Yeah. Close my eyes. Focus my attention here, which is your.
And what was your mantra again, or mantra again?
I can't share my mantra again.
I thought you would slip up and say it.
No. Yeah. So kind of put your attention here. This is your third eye, and then focus on your breath. Yeah. First, you start with kind of a deep breath, so kind of cleansing breath. So you take hard breath and then you kind of exhale forcefully 3-4 times, kind of cleanse it up, so you energize your body, and then you do the box breathing for 3, 4, 5 times, unless.
And box breathing means what?
Is like 6 inhales, like 6 second inhale, 6 second hold, 8 second exhale, and 4 second hold. So you do that like 4 or 5 times. I'm forgetting it's there's a name for this kind of breath as well. You can search that. It's called Ujjayi. Okay, forget it. You just search for box. Box breath is actually the terminology that the Navy, the US Marines use for this breathing technology, breathing style. Yeah. And then you just let go and just focus on your breath. Let your breath control your body. Yeah. Sometimes you might experience the body kind of get stuck sometimes because the breath is taking over your body. But after a point of time, you'll get more and more relaxed. And if you keep focus, if you keep bringing initially your attention will wander, but you have to bring it back to your breath. And some point of time, you will just like this, you will just disappear, and then you will go into a different zone. And then that's.
Would you call it a trance, or what would you call it?
Not a trance really, but you get into that. You kind of touch with that inner peace within you, and then you kind of. Connect with your vibration, and then everything else kind of falls apart. It just melts away, and then you just be there. Some people see some things. You might see like some light, or you might see some sound. Some people might even experience some fragrance. Happens. Depends. What's your kind of whether you are a audio or a visual or kinesthetic person. So when the mind let goes. Then your attention kind of goes in those areas, because what happens is we are so trained to awareness moves in very fixed neural ways. Yeah. When you relax like this, the attention keeps going in different other areas which have not been explored. So you get a lot of lateral kind of thinking, innovation. Sometimes it can also trigger some emotional reaction, but that's okay. It's going to pass away. It's going to fade away.
I can just, I haven't done it as long as you had, but at least for a couple of years. And I know a lot of people like Joe Rogan does it as well regularly these days. And it's everyone has different needs and do it in different ways. Yeah. But if you are able to do it right, it can be really beneficial.
But one disclaimer, I am not a master. So,
You've only been doing it for 40 years or something? Or
No. I mean, I'm not a master, so it's. I mean, don't kind of just do it. Just go with what's comfortable. And it's better if you get a training, because then you get to do it in the right way. But just don't force your breath.
Yes, awesome, cool. Somil, what's going on next in your life, personally, professionally? What's happening?
Yes. So my first and foremost kind of target is to right now create more awareness, which I'm trying to do with different ways, in social media. In a lot of times, I also kind of, companies invite me to have like a talk on monetization, have something like this.
Yeah.
So first step is to create awareness about monetization, understand why it is important, why it is so urgently important.
Right.
And in the what I see a big gap right now in the industry is that we still don't have so many tools for monetization. You have different tools, but they kind of don't come together, and that's where I would like to kind of invest my time and effort.
And if someone hears this and want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. Just send me a connection request and I will accept, and then we can talk. What I'm looking for actually, since my background is more manufacturing and more automotive, I'm actually looking to collaborate with people so that we can take some of these techniques and also apply to other industries. I mean, to retail, to healthcare, and that would be very, very interesting. We do have a community right now going as a part of Airpen Alliance, and we kind of meet every 2 months, discuss and create some of the assets there. So people are also most welcome to join us there. Awesome. And yeah, thank you so much. This was I think I kind of lost track of time a long time ago.
Cool. And last question then. Who else would you like to hear on this podcast?
Who else would I like to hear? I would like to
Except Hendrik. Hendrik is not he probably...
No, I would actually like to hear people, leaders who are talking, who are actually in this commercial space, who are actually leading from the front. So last month, 2 months ago, we had the pleasure of having Ellen from Telia.
Yeah, I know her.
And I think she has some fantastic insights. And I think the best part is, what Hendrik calls having the blood on the shirt kind of. So she has been there, done it. And I think it will be very interesting to have her view on how to really create value.
Yeah, I will get Eden.
Yeah.
I have some interesting stories with...
yes.
Yeah, we can take that at that time. Yes. Cool. That's a great suggestion, I think. Cool, Somil. It was a true pleasure to have you here. And now it's time to do the after work. And I will ask a lot more about meditation and your thoughts about that. And hopefully learn more about that and monetization and so many more things. Thanks
meditation,
again.
Monetization,
Same thing. Not a big difference.
Yeah.
Thank you again. Have a happy Easter, everyone, and a pleasant evening.
Thank you so much. I wish everyone a happy Easter, great vacations, and thank you so much.